before I start this first Law 39 entry, I want to explain something. This piece isn't going to be a short one, simply because some truths can't be flattened into a soundbite without losing what actually makes them true. So this lesson will unfold as a 6-part series. Not to make it complicated, but to make it accurate. Each part builds on the last. Think of it less like a quote and more like a conversation that's being had outside the edges of the frame. Now, there are exceptions. Absolutely, there are. But this is the overall general framework. And this is where Art 1 begins, with how I learned to see. We live in a world of quick assessments and even quicker takes. Absolutes have become the easiest way to define anything, often at the expense of understanding. But human beings were never meant to fit in such rigid boxes. The experiences that shape us are layered, they're fluid, they're contradictory, and very alive. Gender, race, oppression, mental health, identity, desire, fear, purpose, etc. Every one of these exists on a spectrum. Everything is a spectrum, but not everything is on the same spectrum. This lesson exists to establish a more discerning, spectrum-centered way of seeing ourselves and others. It asks for patience, for attention, for the willingness to sit inside nuance long enough to let truth reveal itself. Human beings are not binary. We are dynamic, evolving, and full of contradictions. Absolutes do exist, but only at the far ends of the spectrum. Most human experience exists in the gradients, in that middle area. Confusing the edges for the whole is how complexity gets erased. When absolutes get pulled into the middle, they become shortcuts. They trade accuracy for simplicity. And the moment we strip away nuance is the moment that we strip away humanity. No feeling exists in isolation. What we tend to call opposites are just distant points on the same continuum. Love doesn't disappear, it shifts. Confidence doesn't vanish, it thins. Grief doesn't end, it reorients. We are not switching emotions off and on. We are moving along a scale we were never taught to see. This is why emotional states feel unstable when we try to label them absolutely. We aren't broken, we're emotion. I learned this long before I had the language for it. Not through philosophy, but through design. Any graphic designer knows that 97% black is not the same as 96% black. It's not the same as 95% black. On a screen, to an untrained eye, they can look identical. But once your eye is trained, the difference becomes closer to obvious. Not dramatic, subtle, precise. That training can change how you see everything. You start noticing what other people miss, where things almost touch, but not quite getting there, where contrast is doing quiet work, where balance isn't about symmetry, it's about tension held just right. Human perception works the same way. Nuance isn't instinctual, it's learned. It's a trainable skill. Two people can look at the same thing and see two entirely different things. Not because one is right and the other is wrong. It's because they were trained differently. Their eyes are calibrated to different thresholds. It doesn't make them incompatible. It just means they're situated differently on the spectrum. When the difference is ignored, it becomes a friction. When it's acknowledged, it becomes context. And when it's respected, well, something else happens. Difference stops dividing. Once you train your eye this way, you can't unsee it. You stop asking whether something is black or white, and you start asking, where does it sit? You stop arguing about opposites, and you start noticing gradients. That's when the world stops feeling binary and starts feeling dimensional. Not simpler, clearer. Tupac embodied spectrum living long before there was language for it. Soft and hard, political poetic, chaotic grounded, loving volatile. He was all the things. What made that difficult to hold for most people wasn't inconsistency, it was simultaneity. The world is more comfortable with fixed points than with people who move. It prefers identities that can be summarized, positions that stay put, lives that can be explained without context. Tupac refused to flatten himself to make that easier. He didn't just move randomly across a spectrum. He occupied different regions at different times under different pressures in response to different conditions. That movement wasn't confusion. It was calibration. In today's social media culture, he will be misread constantly. A single clip will be used to define him. A single quote to explain him. A single moment to collapse an entire life. And he was staying exactly as he was. Because his identity wasn't built to be consumed in fragments. He lived in public contradiction with no apology. Most people compress their range in public. They reveal the safest points of their spectrum and keep the rest private, internal, or unresolved. Tupac didn't do that. He externalized more of his spectrum than most people are comfortable seeing. He let different positions surface in real time, before they were reconciled, before they were explained, before they were cleaned up. Each one of us is a spectrum. Each one of us contains multitudes. I could be high on one spectrum and low on another at the same time. If you cross me right there, you don't meet me in general. You meet me at that intersection. That reaction doesn't define my character. It describes my position. Same person, different coordinates. What gets labeled as out of character is often just someone encountering us at a point on the spectrum they're not used to seeing. What we call contradiction is usually just movement along a range we were never taught to recognize. His complexity was never a flaw. It was a feature masquerading as one. Growth doesn't move in straight lines. It veers. It corrects. It doubles back. And somehow we still arrive. This rule set didn't arrive at once. It developed slowly through observation, misinterpretation, correction, repetition. It changed how I deciphered the world around me. But more importantly, it changed how I deciphered myself. Learning to see spectrum-centered slowed me down. It trained my eye toward the in-between. Absolutes felt efficient, clean, reassuring. Absolutes were also very often very inaccurate. Short-form communication eliminates nuance by design. Extremes travel faster than nuance. Nuance doesn't disappear, it gets crowded out. Before division shows up externally, it shows up internally. Reducing myself made it easier for me to reduce others. But when I allowed myself internal nuance, something shifted. Differences stopped feeling like an immediate threat. Complexity stopped feeling like inevitable chaos. That self-bestowed grace didn't guarantee agreement, but it made the pathway to understanding possible. I started to wonder what my inner dialogue would sound like if I allowed gradients instead of judgments. What if I didn't treat moments as verdicts? Success stopped inflating me and setbacks stopped erasing me. They became information instead of identity. A loss wasn't failure, it was a moment on the scale. A win wasn't proof, it was data. Nothing disappeared, it just got recontextualized. I wasn't behind, I wasn't ahead. I was somewhere on the spectrum. If every graphic value can shift by 1%, every human value can as well. Just as color exists on a spectrum, consciousness does too. Before we try to understand the world, we have to see ourselves clearly. Not as fixed points, but as contextual positions. Not single-story identities, but branching orientations moving through a field. We don't live on a single path. We move through a multi-dimensional landscape of possibilities. Emotion gives direction. Orientation gives posture. Meaning emerges from the relationship of the two. This is the work, not mastery, not arrival. Attention. Everything is a spectrum, but not everything is on the same spectrum. Everything is a spectrum, but everything is not on the same spectrum. That distinction matters more than it looks. Love and hate live on one spectrum. Love and fear live on a different axis. They're often confused because the same word appears in both places, but it's doing different work. What I mean by that is this. Love and hate are not opposites in the way that we were taught to think of them. They are different points on the same emotional spectrum. Both require attachment, attention, investment, intensity. In other words, something still matters. Hate is not the absence of love. It's love that stayed engaged after the relationship broke. That's why people say, I don't hate you, I just don't care. Because indifference is the true opposite of both. Indifference is disengagement. When emotional charge drops out completely, the spectrum itself disappears. Now, there are exceptions. Absolutely, there are. But this is the overall general framework. Love and fear are not on the same emotional spectrum. This axis isn't about what you feel, it's about how you're positioned. Love here is not an emotion, it's openness. Fear here is not a weakness, it's protectiveness. Neither is a sin, neither is a virtue. They are orientations, postures, ways of moving through the world. You don't feel this love the way you feel joy and anger. You move from it. Fear doesn't mean you lack love. It means something you value feels threatened. These two dynamics are always active at the same time. We are always feeling something and positioned somewhere. Emotion gives direction, orientation gives posture. Anger doesn't automatically mean contraction. Fear doesn't cancel love. Intensity doesn't tell you if someone is oriented. Only engagement does. This is why people can feel love deeply and still act defensively. Why someone can be angry and still oriented toward care. Why behavior alone is a poor measure of position. When we stop collapsing these dynamics into a single dimension, something becomes real clear. We don't live on a line. We live inside a field. Experience is shaped by where we're positioned and what we're feeling at the same time. This is the distinction that allows nuance without removing accountability, compassion without collapse, clarity without oversimplification. As always, in divine time.